Welcome to the T2 Hubcast. Join Martin, Dave, Spencer and guests as they discuss all things personal and professional development. The T2 Hubcast, brought to you by the People Performance People.
So, welcome to another T2 Hubcast with me, Martin Johnson, and
Michelle Swithenbank
from Hull College Group. So, Michelle, I'm really delighted to have you on, Michelle.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Martin.
I've been, as you know, for Hub listeners, we have a lot of Hubcasts on the Hub, which are recorded by me and Dave and Spencer and the team here at T2. And we talk about various topics from leadership to management to performance psychology. But every now and then we like to get a guest in. And we've done about a dozen guest podcasts now, from people in professional sport to the military to business leaders, etc. But I'm really delighted to have Michelle Swithenbank on the show today. Michelle is the CEO or the Chief Exec and Principal, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Of Hull College Group. We've done a little bit of work together. Where this stemmed from is Michelle had a conference, an end-of-year conference in December for the whole of staff at Hull College Group, which I was the guest speaker at. And I loved doing it. It was a fantastic event. I spoke a little bit about the performance psychology stuff. It went down really well. But prior to that, Michelle had got up as the Principal and Chief Exec and spoke in front of the organisation, and I was just very impressed.
Oh, thank you.
And I mean that sincerely. I was very impressed because the way you conduct yourself, your beliefs around culture, around leadership, around how you drive an organisation forward from culturally and from a performance perspective. And I was just itching to get you on and pick your brain. So we haven't prepared anything, have we?
We have not. No, I'm in cold.
This could go anywhere, but as usual with the T2 Hubcast. But I'm just going to ask you a few questions, or we'll steer some debate for the listeners, any of the leaders out there listening around some of the stuff you're doing at Hull College Group, and see if they can pick the bones out of it. But do you just want to give us a little bit more of a background to you, Michelle? Where do you come from? What have you done in your career before arriving as the Chief Exec at Hull College?
Originally I was a college student myself. So I'd always tell the students that every year when I meet and greet them, that I was sat exactly where they are now, more years ago than I care to remember. Did my, back then, an advanced GNVQ in health and social care, which is the same as like a BTEC now. I then went on to university and did my nurse training, and I spent a few years as a staff nurse. And got into development, staff nurse development and nurse development training. And we were in you'll probably recognise it, an era where we didn't have enough nurses. We were having to recruit overseas. And in the particular field I was in, we recruited nurses from India and the Philippines. And they were about 6 months short of qualifying to go onto our register here in the UK. So my job was to create a curriculum, create a course, and train them for 6 months so that it brought them up to speed and we could register them and then use them as staff nurses on our staff role. So I love doing that. I love that training and development and bringing somebody on and nurturing them and seeing more impact, really, because it wasn't just about my passion for nursing. It was then teaching it to somebody else and seeing other people go out there and deliver.
So was that the moment then you fell in love with the education side of things? Yeah.
I realised I joined nursing to make a difference, and people say that, but you are literally making a difference to people's lives every day. But when you're teaching somebody to make a difference to people's life, you're having a bigger ripple. And then when you're managing people who are training people to change lives, you're having a bigger ripple and so on. So I realised the more strategic I got, the more I could weave in passion and enthusiasm for whatever I was doing. But that's what got me into education and training. So I did my teacher training whilst I was doing that. And then I applied for my local college for a lecturer's job. But then in uniform public services, they didn't have a health and social care contract. So I taught uniform public services.
That was an experience.
It was a real online live learning experience. I had to learn all about how the RAF worked, the Army, the police force, the fire and rescue service, and I worked with all of those multidisciplinary areas and learnt with the students really for some of it, and loved doing that. And then I kind of just took on bigger areas and climbed through the different ranks within education from there on. But one thing that's always stuck with me, as I've always kept the students at the heart, really. And still now, that's what I love doing. I love presenting to the students. I love seeing them. I love talking to them. I love introducing them. I love getting them back on the right path when they go off on a wrong direction, and you have to bring them back in and go, come on, book your ideas up and get on with your work. So,
and am I right in saying that you've sat on the other side of the fence from an Ofsted situation?
Yes, yeah, I'm a part-time inspector as well. I don't do so much these days because I don't like being away from my organisation. Not that they need me to be away; they can manage perfectly well without me. But I love being there, so I don't tend to do as much.
And now leading an organisation like Hull College Group, does that give you a better perspective on how to run the organisation, knowing what is required from the regulator? Or do you think that is just part of the equation? I don't want to say it's a tick box exercise or a few boxes to tick, but has it given you any more insight into how to run the organisation, or do you think that's the output and you focus on the inputs, if that makes sense?
I think it's a bit of both. It's part of it. So yes, it gives me an idea. It certainly gives me an idea of what's expected of us, because not just inspecting, but I have to go on training days with the regulatory body. So I'm up to date as an inspector. So that gives me a really good insight into what's coming around the corner, what we need to be preparing for. So I can give my staff a heads up on, look, this is what's happening in September. The framework's changing. We're going to be inspected differently. And I might have the benefit of knowing that maybe ahead of some of other colleagues in the sector, because I've got that training as an inspector. But when I'm out in practice expecting, yes, I pick up some great examples of best practice, but I think you can also pick up examples of how you might do things differently and why you might do things differently, particularly me as a leader. I've spoke to you lots before, Martin, about how you can read all the books in the world and you can spout the leadership talk, but it's how you live it, breathe it and behave it. And you've got to show it, almost walking the walk.
And the reason I asked you that question is because I work with many organisations, from the military to emergency services, the NHS, fire and rescue, the police force, education, and it is the areas where you are heavily regulated. Everybody's got their own regulators, but it almost creates a culture of outputs, not inputs. So we become consumed by meeting the output or the outputs, so much so that as leaders, we forget to coach and manage the inputs required to achieve the output in the first place. And that for me, that I'm a strong believer in challenge and threat state. I believe we have to induce a challenge state in organizations by focusing on what we want to achieve, and not the threat state where we're focused on the consequence of what might happen or not achieving. Yeah. And I see it more so in education, in emergency services, in the military, where you are regulated. It by the default, it drives the leadership into a set of behaviours which focus entirely on outputs, and then triggers a threat state in the organisation. How do you combat that? I mean, you're very much, I get the sense, focused on the inputs of people.
Absolutely.
And the outputs will come as a result.
They do, and they can take time to come as well. So I've said to all of my staff that an inspection is a snapshot moment. It's somebody coming in for 1 week, not knowing your organisation. And I see it myself. I go out there and I can't possibly say every organisation I've seen is definitely that judgment we've given them. It's what we've seen at that point in time, given the evidence we've collected at that point in time. And your organisation's worth so much more than that. It's not just that week when you're regulated. It's what you do for your customers. And for us, that's our learners and our students. So regardless of whatever grade anybody gives you, it's what are you doing for them? What lives are you changing? And focus on that prize, not the regulatory prize, because that's just something we have to navigate around. And the other way I challenge it is to say to them, look, this isn't going away. We can't get away from the fact that we are judged on these things. That's not going to change. That's the context. That's the field we're working in. But how can we help you to achieve that? How can we work around it? What can we do to make things easier? And I hold a regular staff consultative committee where they come to me every month and they talk about the issues that they're facing. They bring examples of best practice to me so I can share that with the rest of the organisation. But we have it as a talking shop as well to sort of like thrash out those issues and say, okay, what can we do to support you in that thing? So if you're finding that your workload's too high at the moment because of what we're expecting as an output, because this is what our regulator wants, how can I ease that? What solutions can you give me that I can help you with?
Love it. Love it. And I'm going to say it because I don't mind being controversial at times, but I observe that in many different industries who are regulated by a scoring system or whatever it might be, I've seen organizations fudge the output. Now, you know what I mean by that. What I mean by that is when they become consumed by getting an outstanding or whatever the scoring metric is, we all know that in organizations, you can do certain things to make yourself look like you're in that, even if to the employees, it doesn't feel like you're anywhere near that. And I guess that comes down to the integrity and the honesty of the leader, the leadership team. Are we okay in saying that we're not there yet and we're here, but we're comfortable with that because this is the plan and here's what we're doing to do it, rather than the ones who want to look good, but internally in the organization, it doesn't feel anywhere near like it. And that's where you get disenfranchised cultures and employees. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I think that's one of the first things I said to all of the staff when I joined is, look, regardless of what we've been assessed at before, this is not where we truly are. This is where we are, and this is what we need to get to that next level. And we're doing it together. And that's the other thing I drive in the organisation. It's not a case of whose faults, who's to blame for what's gone wrong, who's at fault if something has gone wrong, because it's natural. An organisation always has issues that you have to fix, but that's the important word. It's how we fix it together. We're not interested in how it happened necessarily, or whose fault it's about let's all rush to the aid of whoever needs the support and the assistance to make that better.
Love it. And I always have a saying, and it's for any organisation listening. In order to influence culture and performance, right, you have to see your organisation how it is, not better nor worse. Mm-hmm. You have to see it how it is, right? And to see it how it is, you have to strip everything back and be completely honest and say, well, if we're not there yet, but we're here, how do we get there, right? Sometimes the leaders believe their organisation is better than it is. And sometimes the staff think it's worse than what it actually is. It's just the nature of it, right? It's probably somewhere in the middle, but in order to improve anything, we've got to see it how it is, not better nor worse, is my view. And
I think it's perception, and perception's important. So one of the things we do as a leadership team is engage in a consultant that comes in every year and speaks to a cross section of staff at various levels across the organisation. And gets their perceptions on leadership and management, on strategy, on culture, because regardless of what we think it looks like or what the whole staff think it looks like, the perception of what it actually is important as well.
And that's like an organizational 360. So this is important because when we've done exercises with organizations, Michelle, where we do cultural surveys, if we just do upwards feedback survey, we're only getting a view from the ground.
Yeah.
If we just do it in a leadership boardroom, we're getting what we think it is. So it's really important, to Michelle's point, to reach out to every corner of your organization and find out how it truly feels with the same type of questions, the same type of challenging, if you like. And that is going to give you a holistic view on as an average.
Absolutely. I mean, I can give you an example. We've recently had some new systems installed at the college, which are needed, but they take time. We probably put them in a lot quicker than we should have done, but that was unfortunately the time frame we were having to work to. And those new systems will eventually in time make things a lot easier for the staff. But at the moment, even though we know the system's set up and the leadership team know what it's about to do, from the staff's point of view, their perception is this has made things a whole lot worse because they're now having to deal with a hybrid of two systems together. Their perception is that the systems are chronic and it's not made it any bit of difference. And I know they know that, and I know they think that because of the feedback that I've been seeking from them and that I've been obtaining from them. But what that does, it means as leaders, we're then able to say, okay, I know that's how you feel at the moment. This is how we can help you in the meantime. And this is what it's going to look like later down the line. If we didn't get that perception from the staff that they still think systems are off, even though we've invested all of this money in them, they're not working yet, we wouldn't be able to bridge that gap.
Yeah.
And then that's at the point when you can end up losing staff buy-in.
We see this all the time where staff complain about a change program or a new technology or a new process, and the leadership team, because they bet the bottom dollar on it, right? They hang their hats on it. They're going, stop being negative, this, and they get on with it, right? But that appreciation to truly listen to challenges and not just bat them away and actually accept them and say, we're in agreement. It's not perfect, but it will be, it will get close to it in the future if we work together and we keep pushing forward. Okay, so I'm going to keep this moving because I want to ask you about a couple of other things. So we talked a little bit there around knowing your organization and culture and being honest, Because
Absolutely.
when you've got a
Honesty is
starting
important.
point and you know where you want to be, then we can start that journey. Let's talk about leadership next. So one of the things that I know you've done is you've looked at the structure of your leadership team. You've looked at the people you're surrounding yourself with. And I know you place an enormous amount of onus on strong leadership in an organization. I also do. I think we cast a cultural shadow. I think a dozen leaders can influence 500 or they can disengage 500, right? Why do you believe it's so important to get that element right? And should you have leaders who are great at the job and knowledgeable so they become a leader, or do you place more of an onus on the people and human and element and they can learn the job? Because here's a big thing that we see, Michelle. Sometimes the people who are good at jobs get the promotion. So we've got our best people on the floor, so we'll make them the head of the department, but then probably useless for people, right?
Yeah.
So whereas you could get some great people leaders, they know nothing about the department, but they have people underneath them who do.
Absolutely.
So, but then you get the old adage of, but do the people underneath leaders find them credible if they don't know about the job, right? Where do you stand on all this?
I think leadership is absolutely about people. I think leadership and management are two separate things. So to manage, you've got to know your stuff because you've got to have that credibility to manage. And as a senior leadership team, we've got to be a bit of both. We've got to be managers, but we've also got to be leaders as well. And it's separating those two out for me. And for me, leadership is absolutely, for me, it's about how I behave, how I act, and how I conduct myself, because I can have all the team, all the strategy, all the culture in the world. But it's about how I live and breathe that as the head of the organisation. And if I'm not walking the walk, then none of it's going to sink in because people see me as the head of the organisation as leading that culture.
Do you know what? You listen, you've made a really good point, and I just want to throw in for any listeners here a couple of definitions, because people interchange the words leader, manager, leadership like there's no tomorrow, right? You're, and we haven't rehearsed this, have we?
No, not at all.
But you're absolutely in line with T2's theory. You know, management or the managers are there to ensure and manage that a set of process, tasks, and activities are achieved to achieve the outcome and the objectives of the organisation. Whereas leadership, for me, is when people start to want to follow, replicate the actions, attitudes, and behaviours of influential others. It's where they look at someone and go, I get it. I buy in. I want to be like you. I see the value of that. And they want to follow off their own accord. And just because you hold a position of command, authority, or rank doesn't mean you show leadership.
No, not at all.
In fact, in many cases, you don't. Right? You get stuck in that management role. Whereas the people who straddle the two, i.e. they're very good at managing the process, tasks, and activities required to achieve the performance, but people generally want to follow them and like them and observe great behaviours and characteristics in them. That's when you've cracked it, right?
Absolutely.
And have you focused on that in building your team then?
Totally. So for me, I mean, I've always said I surround myself with people that know more than me, because that's what helps the organisation to drive and be successful. I shouldn't know everything. I've got a team that know their speciality and know their subject, and they should be allowed the autonomy to get on with that and be their expertise in their area. So yeah, for me, the team's been built up very much on, are you the right cultural fit? So are you going to live and breathe the behaviours that I've started out and set as the chief exec? So there'd be no point me putting people as important and placing them as my motto is staff first, student first, staff always. So we put the student first, but it's about our staff always. And if the rest of my team aren't going to buy into that and haven't got that personality and that drive to put people at the heart of it, then again, it doesn't flow through the rest of the organisation. So when I was recruiting my team, cultural fit was one of the top of the list in terms of what I was looking for, as well as their expertise and their knowledge and their experience. But I would have chosen somebody that I felt was more of a cultural fit for what we were trying to achieve over somebody that was more knowledgeable and experienced.
And that's in an organisation like yours, which is very academic and skill set based, right? So it can be done. And it fits in with Richard Branson's theory of, you know, people say to him, is the customer the king? Well, no, yes, they're important, but if you treat your staff right, they'll treat your customers right. And it's a similar principle. Similar principle with you. So you've gone heavily from a leadership capability on the human element and the character fit and the mindset type, which has allowed you then to, at least at the top, have a group of people who are all heading in the right direction and believe in the same things.
Absolutely. So I expect all of my leadership team to be doing back to the floor with me. It's something I started last year.
Just explain what that is for the listeners.
So back to the floor is where we spend a morning or an afternoon or a day a month working in another area of the college, of the organisation of the group with the staff. It started off as nominated, and it started off actually with me wanting to hear from the staff directly, because I came into an organisation where staff didn't really talk to the leadership team much, and I wanted to break down those communication barriers. So I put out a staff survey and said, right, I'm going to come out and work for a morning with a team. Who would you like me to work with? And the staff consultative committee put it up that I could either go with the library, the premises cleaning team, or the nursery. And I started off with the premises cleaning team. I've since been with the nursery as well, and I've been out every month.
Was that a conscious decision, Michelle, to say, well, I'll start off cleaning because that is the obvious place to say no, because you could have easily picked one of the others, right? But no, I'll start off. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but you get my point here. I'll start off doing a little bit of the dirty work to show that I'm going to try and reach every corner of this organisation.
Well, I didn't pick. That was 3 options put to the staff last year to say, where do you want the chief exec to go? And the staff picked cleaning. And I had a great time. I learned so much with that team, to be able to talk to the cleaners directly, for them to tell me what their challenges were in their day. I learned a lot, and I was able to then provide them with some equipment that they were desperately needed, because they didn't know who to tell them where to go with that. So we achieved some key outcomes out there. But I did that every month. So since I've been with a variety of teams and continue to do so, but I make that now a mandatory requirement of the whole team, that they're to spend a day wherever, learning other parts of the organisation, living the life in other teams' shoes. Because then when you come together as a team and proposals are brought to you to consider, if you've worked and lived a day in the life of those different staff, you can understand it better.
Yeah, love it. So leadership-wise, just to recap, because I've got one more area I want to ask you about. Leadership-wise, you do place a large onus on on the senior team having that human element, that the right characteristics and behaviours that leaders need to display, all heading in the right direction. But what I'm picking up here is you've in your early tenure at Hull College Group, you've placed an enormous amount of onus on engaging your people early, and saying it's not about us sitting in ivory towers. It's not about us getting together as a leadership team once a quarter and we'll send a newsletter out afterwards. It's about getting out there and engaging your people. And do you know what, Michelle? Leaders say to me sometimes in organizations, I haven't got the time. It's so difficult. How am I supposed to get across 500? It can be done.
You've got to make time. Because that's the example of, when I say walking the walk and behaving it, there's a true example. Being out there, everyone says you've got to engage your staff. Well, what better way than to show you're physically doing that? The other thing I did was move us. We were up on the second floor of an organisation. I've moved us down to the downstairs ground floor. We're right behind reception. We're in the heart of the college, and we are visible and we're present and we're accessible. And that physical behavioural move to say we want to be part, we're not in an ivory tower, we want to be part of the team, says a lot. It says a lot more than me standing up saying I want to be this kind of leader. I'm showing that's what we want to be.
Which brings me on to my third point, which will, for the last 5 minutes, is proximity and infrastructure. We have a section on the hub called social and relationships in the wellbeing section. And what we mean by this is, I'm a massive advocate and believer in, as an organisation, you have to create a social ecosystem where you've got the ability to connect with people, and other people have got the ability to build meaningful relationships, whether that's down the canteen or whatever it might be. You've already talked there about you've moved from the higher floors as a traditional executive team down to the bottom floor. So right where students come in the morning, you're there, you're visible, you're seen. How much do you believe that a layout of an organisation, from an infrastructure, from a proximity perspective, and your ability to allow social relationships and connections contributes towards performance and culture? I'll give you an example. If you've got office, and everybody's restricted sometimes to the space they've got, right? But where you've got lots of small offices, siloed departments, finance sitting there, HR sitting there, the executive teams on the top floor, et cetera, that physicality can create the boundaries and the silos. Whereas when you create a hub or when you create spaces and areas for people to come together and engage physically, for me, that works wonders for driving a culture going forward. Was that part of your move and the reason you wanted to be on the force?
It was for two reasons. Firstly, was to make us more accessible and visible, because I have an open door policy, and I don't say that loosely. I genuinely mean if staff want to come and see me, then they can come and see me. If they want to guarantee seeing me when I'm not in a meeting, they book an appointment. But generally, if it's something that's really griping them, I'll make the time to see them. So I genuinely have an open door policy. So being in an accessible place where everyone felt they could come, and where we were before, because that was a corridor that traditionally was associated with staff never entering because they weren't allowed to go and see the senior team at that time, I had to break that barrier physically. So by moving us, it broke away and put a line in the sand to say, this is not the culture anymore. This is what we're doing moving forward. So I needed to break that previous culture. So that was the first reason. And the second reason was for better multi-collaborative working. So within our offices, we don't all have our own office. There's some shared planned offices.
Yeah.
And that makes better intercollaborative working. So rather than having to walk about finding one another or relying on emails to communicate, we're now all in an office together, so can solve problems together. We can drive performance together. We can work on our strategy together, and make it more human. Because at the end of the day, we were born to talk and communicate, not send continuous emails.
So trying to facilitate in the organisation for spaces and areas for people to come together and meet face to face is really important. I have this conversation a lot. This new wave of open plan spaces and hot desking, and nobody has a fixed desk. You just turn. There's an extreme to that which doesn't cater for the introvert who needs some space, peace, and quiet. But there's also you can't just go big bang and say, we're going to have a completely open space or we're going to have lots of small offices. Where I see it working is where you've got the private space when needed for confidential meetings or for introverts to work or whatever it might be, but where you can have what I call the canteen effect, which is an open space, a hub for people to come together, grab a coffee, and where you can interact creates a social ecosystem. And that in turn allows employees to build meaningful relationships and connections, which is categorically and scientifically proven to give greater fulfillment in the workplace.
Absolutely, and that's what we've tried to achieve with our area. We've got lots of breakout areas as well as a meeting room, and it's about utilising lots of space, so that you're not stuck with the same area as well. And in terms of restricted space, I had this initially when I first started. I haven't been able to move us until recently. So I'd been at the college a year before I could physically move the team. So what I did to overcome that was took myself to reception. So I promoted and advertised times that I would be sat in reception with a coffee to talk to staff in an open environment, to remove that office barrier.
Love it. One more question. You've got 60 seconds to answer it.
Okay.
We've got 30 minutes. A lot of people are listening to this podcast. It's fascinating. I could talk to you all day long, right? But a lot of people will be listening to this. And one thing I feel passionate about is we have to start catering for the future generations in the workplace. Everybody talks about millennials. Millennials are already in your workplace. They're up to 37 years old, born after 1980. Generation Z are coming through, right? So we've got to get smart. We've got to start adjusting. People have more choice than ever, right? We can work from home, emergence of the digital world, etc. 60 seconds, tips for organizations and leadership teams. What should they be doing if they want to attract the generations of the future into the workplace and look 10 years from now?
I think flexible working is important. I think focusing on outputs, not presenteeism.
Yeah.
And looking at the other benefits you can bring, because not everybody's financially orientated. It's what else can you bring to attract people to your organisation? And that's what kind of leader are you? How flexible are you? How inspiring are you? How do you cater for family life? And being that flexible in terms of, look, this is what I want you to do. I'm going to rely on your expertise and your input because that's what I'm paying you for, and letting people get on with that and measuring the output, not just how often you're there.
Love it. Absolutely love it. So that brings us to the end of the Hubcast. Michelle Swithenbank from Hull College Group. I could talk to you all day long. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming in and sharing some insights there on culture and leadership, and talent and all of the great things. You're doing a great job there. And hopefully, if I can convince you in a quarter's time to come back, we could maybe do something else.
Absolutely. Look forward to working with you in the summer, Martin.
Awesome. Thanks, Michelle. Speak to you soon.
Bye.